Government ought to be run by the people. That is the democratic ideal in a nutshell. But how much and what kind of citizen participation is necessary for democratic government? Neither political theorists nor politicians, neither idealists nor realists can agree on an answer. Advocates of direct democracy believe that if citizens do not participate directly in government affairs, making government decisions themselves, they should give up all pretense of living in a democracy. People can govern indirectly through their elected representatives, and they maintain that choosing leaders through elections is the only workable approach to democracy. In this module, we will cover political participation. Political participation is defined as those actions of private citizens by which they seek to influence or to support government and politics. This definition embraces both conventional and unconventional forms of political participation. Conventional participation is relatively routine behavior that uses the established institutions of representative government, especially campaigning for candidates and voting in elections. Voting and writing letters to public officials are examples of conventional political participation. Unconventional participation is relatively uncommon behavior that challenges or defies established institutions or the dominant culture. Staging sit-down strikes in public buildings and chanting slogans outside officials' windows are examples of unconventional participation. The heart of democratic government lies in the electoral process. Elections institutionalize mass participation in democratic government. Electoral rules specify who is allowed to vote, how much each person's votes count, and how many votes are needed to win. Voting is the act individuals engage in when they choose among alternatives in an election. Suffrage and franchise both mean the right to vote. By formalizing political participation through rules for suffrage and for counting ballots, electoral systems allow large numbers of people who individually have little political power to wield great power. Electoral systems decide collectively who governs and, in some instances, what government should do. According to democratic theory, everyone should be able to vote. In practice, however, no nation grants universal suffrage. All countries have age requirements for voting, and all disqualify some inhabitants on various grounds: lack of citizenship, criminal record, mental incompetence. What is the record of enfranchisement in the U.S.? The United States was the first country to provide for general elections of representatives through mass suffrage. When the Constitution was framed, the idea of full adult suffrage was too radical to consider seriously. The framers left the issue of enfranchisement to the states. Initially, most states established tax-paying or property-holding requirements for voting. Virginia, for example, required ownership of 25 acres of settled land or 500 acres of unsettled land. The original 13 states began to lift such requirements after 1800. Expansion of the franchise accelerated after 1815 with the admission of new western states, Indiana, Illinois, Alabama, where land was more plentiful and widely owned. By the 1850s, the states had eliminated virtually all tax-paying and property-holding requirements, thus allowing the working class, at least its white male members, to vote. Extending the vote to African Americans and women took longer. We'll now see how enfranchisement of these two groups occurred in the U.S. The 15th Amendment, adopted shortly after the Civil War, prohibited the states from denying the right to vote on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. However, the states of the old Confederacy worked around the amendment by reestablishing old voting requirements, poll taxes, literacy tests, that worked primarily against African Americans. The extension of full voting rights to blacks came in two phases, separated by 20 years. In 1944, the Supreme Court decided in Smith v. Allwhite that laws preventing blacks from voting in primary elections were unconstitutional, holding that party primaries are part of the continuous process of electing public officials. The Voting Rights Act of 1965, which followed Selma's Bloody Sunday by less than 5 months, suspended discriminatory voting tests. It also authorized federal registrars to register voters in 7 southern states, where less than half of the voting age population had registered to vote in the 1964 election. In 1966, the Supreme Court ruled in Harper v. Virginia State Board of Elections that state poll taxes are unconstitutional. Although long in coming, these actions by the national government to enforce political equality in the states dramatically increased the registration of Southern African Americans. The enfranchisement of women in the United States is a less sordid story, but still nothing to be proud of. Women had to fight long and hard to win the right to vote. Until 1869, women could not vote anywhere in the world. American women began to organize to obtain suffrage in the mid-1800s. Known then as suffragettes, the early feminists initially had a limited effect on politics. Their first major victory did not come until 1869, when Wyoming, while still a territory, granted women the right to vote. No state followed suit until 1893, when Colorado enfranchised women. Between 1896 to 1918, 12 other states gave women the vote. Most of these states were in the West, where pioneer women often departed from traditional women's roles. Nationally, the women's suffrage movement intensified, often resorting to unconventional political behavior, such as marches and demonstrations, which occasionally invited violent attacks from men and even other women. In 1919, Congress finally passed the 19th Amendment, which prohibits states from denying the right to vote on account of sex. The amendment was ratified in 1920 in time for the November election. Researchers have found that socioeconomic status is a good indicator of most types of conventional political participation. People with more education, higher incomes, and white-collar or professional occupations tend to be more aware of the effect of politics on their lives, to know what can be done to influence government actions, and to have the necessary resources, time, and money to take action. So they are more likely to participate in politics than are people of lower socioeconomic status. Another important variable is age. Young people are more likely to take part in political protests, but they are less likely to participate in conventional politics. Voting rates tend to increase as people get older. The 18 to 35 demographic is a long sought-after group by Democrats to mobilize and turn out the vote. They showed up in record numbers for Obama in 2008 and 2012. Republicans have leaned toward those with higher incomes, age, and education level, although there are always exceptions. Voting is a low-initiative form of participation that can satisfy all three motives for political participation, showing allegiance to the nation, obtaining particularized benefits, and influencing broad policy. Why is there low voter turnout in the U.S.? Some attribute most of the decline to changes in voters' attitudes toward politics. One factor being that government is not responsive to its citizens, and voting does no good. Another is a change in attitude toward political parties, along with a decline in the extent and strength of party identification. The two charts shown here show the decline of participation in presidential elections over time, the chart on the left, and compare political participation among the prominent races within this country. That includes white, African Americans, and Latinos.